Hi, Mary. How are you? Can you hear me, Mary? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello there, Mary. How are you? Very cool. Do you have any questions for me? You can type them out for me. There's a chat bar, so you can type out any of your questions and I'll go ahead and answer those. Okay? Oh my God.
Yes. They just killed the whole development?
Not exactly. And we had completely forgotten this, but there was a man in the governor's office. And he pointed out something we'd forgotten, which was that the whole project was based on the idea that the water's no good up there anymore, which is a lie. Not true at all, not even a little. It just made it up. So he ordered another study, like a chemical analysis of the water. And that could take years. So I think everyone won. You should just get up and do it.
Go ahead, guys. Ask any questions that you need.
No, you don't have any power. You have to do everything. Done? No, it's not time to be up. Is it too late? I've been watching this for I know you've been working the whole time, but I'm just going to get on the phone. The man is exactly here, one floor more.
No, I don't even mention.
So, guys, have any questions? Do you have any questions? Mary, can you hear me?
I spilled wine on it, and my wife hasn't forgiven me. I really appreciate it.
Cool, great.
So I look like someone wants to steal it. Okay, well,
And I was going to say, if you did this, if it would be I don't know if it still happens.
let me speak to you.
Of the entire store.
Of the Republic of Dresses. Whoever can help me with this, because you're falling short.
Just a minute.
So, Mary, can you hear me? If you can, go ahead and do that and try to put it in the chat, and I'll go ahead and answer your question. I can see your response that you got it. You got the group chat part. Who else is here? And I'll go ahead and answer your questions.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Lana. That's great. So just go ahead and go into the chat part on the top left and go ahead and ask a question.
How can I help you?
So hi, Lana. How are you? So go ahead and ask any questions. I'll be happy to answer them, whatever you want for any of the topics.
You spilled wine on it. I may have spilled the wine, and I was looking to exchange it or replace it because it would get me out of the ladies' dresses department.
Yeah.
So go ahead and ask any questions.
Here's a merchandise.
So go ahead and I'll be ready to answer them. If you know anybody that wants to get on the chat, let me know and I'll invite them.
She loves it. It's very,
Lana, you can hear me, correct? So type that you can hear me. Mary type is she can hear me. So if anybody else can hear me, just type that you can, and then I'll go ahead and answer any of the questions that you post in the chat, and I'll be happy to do that for you. I'm just also trying to delete people. Great. So you're going to type your question in the chat part, and then I'll go ahead and answer them for everybody there. So go ahead and do that. I'm still going to be inviting people to join the video conference.
hasn't self-destructed, but it's just a matter of time. And how are you?
I think it's much already. I'm very well. Greg is just finishing up his residency. He's actually been doing his specialty in the doctors, so it's the latest thing.
And what would that be?
Well, a lot of it will be on there. I mean, we're going to be talking about on the test. It's going to have questions on the framers. It's going to have questions on the Constitutional Convention. It's going to have questions on the Constitution. It's going to have questions on the Supreme Court cases. It's going to have questions on federalism. So I'm looking at probably, maybe chapter 1, there's going to be 5, 6 questions. On chapter 2, it's probably going to be about, say, 15. Chapter 30, it's going to be about 15. And you've got cases. So, I mean, the Federalist Papers, you're going to need to know what their design was. They were there to convince New York that New York should pass the constitutional, ratify the Constitution. Who were the authors? It was, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, and, you're 10 and 51. What was 10 and 51 about? Those were the main ones that we talk about. 10 is about factions and how a republic, this Constitution, would reduce the importance of factions. And then 51 was also how important this form of government, Republican form of government, was in, limiting the power of the government. And it talks about separation of powers, it talks about a direct democracy, and so on. So you'll need to know 10 and 51, and I would read them, and you have them in the outline. So, Lana, you're asking, I mean, everything in chapter 1, 2, and 3 is going to be on the test, and you need to know it, you need to read it, and that study guide is there to help you. In Federalist Papers, probably a couple questions on it. So whatever you don't understand about them, go ahead and ask. So ask and post some questions that you might have. Lana, absolutely. So you're going to have checks and balances. So absolutely, how does the president check Congress? How does Congress check the president? How does the Supreme Court check Congress? So yes, absolutely, you have to know them. Now, it's not going to be a ton of them, but I think there's going to be two questions on checks and balances. Yeah.
This must be Mr. Hilton.
What else?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I want you to put my stack through space. Sweet, but I want Don to see that this works for most people.
Instructed.
I want to hear all.
You need to know about the amendment process. You need to know about the Bill of Rights and the amendments. So yes. Now the informal, how do you actually change it informally? I would know that. And I would definitely know how you, there are no informal amendments. They are basically the 27 amendments, and you'll need to know the 10th Amendment. You'll need to know the 5th Amendment, Bill of Rights, obviously, First Amendment, Second Amendment, and so on. Pick which one. There is McCullough versus Maryland. There is Morrison versus U.S., Lopez versus U.S., Kelo versus New London, and obviously Marbury versus Madison. You're going to need to know. I think Alden versus Maine is in chapter. There's quite a few of them in the chapter, but the main ones I was talking about. So which one do you want to go over? Which one didn't we go over in class, Mary? I'll be happy to go over it. So go ahead and tell me what you want to cover.
Oh, the drinking alone. This is a long night alone, eh? Oh, parla molto bene italiano. Cosa fa stasera? Non so la città, non so la città.
Yes, Lana, anything on the study guide you need to know. So they're not amendments. They are informal ways to change the Constitution. So they are not amendments, and there is nothing called an informal amendment. There's informal changing of the Constitution, and those are the ways to do the change the Constitution without going through 2/3 proposed by Congress and 3/4 ratified the states. So those are the ones that are the informal methods of changing the Constitution. Okay? Yes, you need to know them. You'll need to know them all year long. You're going to need to know the informal and how it's easier. One of the essays is talking about informal methods and formal methods. So half the essay is about formal methods, and then the other part is informal. So basically, it might be the essay that I asked and give to you tomorrow that you're going to do as a take-home. So yes, you will need to know those. So Mary, you got to refresh me and tell me which case do you want to go over. So I don't know which one we covered, and second was different than you guys. So which one do you want to cover?
That's right, you're married.
Okay, McCullough versus Maryland. There's probably going to be two questions on it. One of the most important ones after Marbury. That's where Maryland went to tax the Second National Bank that was located in Baltimore, and the bank did not refuse to pay the tax, and it went to the Supreme Court. So this one basically confirmed that there are implied powers, and the implied powers is in the Constitution. And then Alexa, turn it off. Muted. Thank you. So McCullough basically was a case that confirmed the implied powers. It also stated that the states cannot interfere or tax a federal institution. So the states can't tax a federal bank. The states can't tax, say, like the national parks. They actually defined necessary. The state of Maryland basically said necessary was implied as important or needed or required, and the Supreme Court said necessary was not that. It was actually more broad. So in the case, it allowed implied powers. It strengthened the power. It said that the U.S. could start a national bank. So that was one of the powers it was allowed to do, and also basically said that basically federal was over the state. So it did quite a few things, and it was very important for this. So McCullough was, let's see, in the test question, we can be looking at states cannot interfere or tax legitimate activities of the federal government was the main one there. Also, it was the federal government was supreme over states, and implied powers were allowed by the Constitution. So that was important about McCullough. Now, Alexa, go ahead and type. Alexa, you can go ahead and type in the chat your question, and then I'll go ahead and answer it. So if you can see that, that's fine. Mary, if you want to go over any other cases. And I think, Lana, you didn't go over different cases. You didn't get to the same ones that fourth period did. So you can go ahead and go over those. Does everybody understand Kelo versus New London? Does everybody understand Morrison versus the U.S.? Lopez versus the U.S. So if you don't understand the case, go ahead. Thanks, Alexa. If you have a question, go ahead and ask. There's going to be about 58 questions, multiple choice. And it was pretty much the breakdown that I gave to you in class. And today I just want to go over concepts and things, some of the Supreme Court cases, mandates. You're going to have to make sure you read the mandates and the federalism part closely. Some example questions. After the Civil War, the debate about the meaning of federalism was what part of the Constitution. So look at that. Also know recall, initiative, referendum. Know those three things that's in chapter 3. By the 1940s, the Supreme Court rulings about the Commerce Clause. So a lot on the Commerce Clause because that was important. And that was with federalism. Also the 10th Amendment about federalism. How the federal government distributes and awards money and contracts, grants with money, grants without money, funded and unfunded. Why is there the growth of mandates? So what does the text say about that? Dual federalism. There's a question on dual federalism. So a lot of times the federalism questions might be a little bit, I don't know, I want to say tricky, but they're specific, and it's basically, did you read the book? Doing your study guide. John Locke, there's a question on Locke I see about reasons to overthrow or change the government. Like I said, there's 5 questions about legitimacy, pluralist view, bureaucratic view, those kind of things. So there's those questions. Interesting question, when the Constitution was ratified, the framers, what was their commitment to? And what was the framers, did they base their decisions on self-interest? Did they base their decisions on the states? Did they base their decisions on the federal government, their economics? So those things. Sure, New London. Kelo versus New London was a case where there was basically a dilapidated, poor housing area. So the area in New London was very poor, and there was a developer that wanted to take over the land and actually build condos. And this is the first time that eminent domain was used for private property. It wasn't for the federal government. Normally, the Fifth Amendment in eminent domain is where the federal government will take your property for a road, for a school, for public use. And this wasn't for public use. This was actually for private use for a condo developer. And so this was a Fifth Amendment question, eminent domain question, and the right of the government to take private property. And the Supreme Court found that the developers could do that because it would improve. They had a plan where it would improve the neighborhood, it would improve the area, it would improve basically New London. So it was for public use, improving that area and make it, nicer, cleaner. But it does open a ball of wax. It opens up a lot because now possibly the ASU can take property from people, and they have been trying for years to take over property in Phoenix, and they were denied because it was a private institution. Now they're able to do that. Also, there was fears that Walmart could take your property, Kmart, some developer like that, because it's better for the town to have that Walmart than, the whatever place it was. So that was a Fifth Amendment case about taking property away, eminent domain. Question on amending the Constitution. So make sure you understand there are 4 different ways to amend the Constitution. Tomorrow, yes, you will. Elastic clause, understand the elastic clause. The anti-federalists, you're going to have to know them, what their chief accomplishment was, what their fears were. So make sure you understand that. Why has the power of the federal government grown relative to the state's government? Asking that quite a few times. So make sure you know that. Again, the 4 theories of who governs: the pluralist view, Marxist view, power elite view, democratic view, or bureaucratic view. Make sure you know those. Characteristics of a federalist, characteristics of an anti-federalist. Make sure you know those. Here, give an example of a check and balance. Shays Rebellion. Make sure you know the Great Compromise. Judicial review. And one of the things I'm going to be listing in there is what was actually in the Constitution. So you need to know what was in it. State of the Union, judicial review, different things. So make sure you understand what's in it. There is a specific question on the characteristics of judicial review. Federalism is there. Hey Graham, tune off your sound, and then go ahead and ask a question. Welcome in. Okay. So McCullough, it's going to have New London, it's going to have Morrison, so those are going to be on there. Item line veto, make sure you know the item line veto. Devolution is going to be on there. That's a pretty easy question. But don't forget there is referendum, recall, initiative, knowing those. Block grants, strings attached, which typically are unfunded. Like what is most common ones that are funded and unfunded. So like if you have an unfunded mandate, it's most likely going to be civil rights and environment. Most likely it's going to be environment. And then if you have funded education, many times is funded when you're looking at No Child Left Behind, or you look like the Race to the Top. Those are funded mandates. Even the IDA, Aid to Disabilities Act, was funded, at least in part. Alexander Hamilton in federalism. Block grants, revenue sharing. So there's a lot on federalism that we didn't go over. So I wanted to make sure that you got it and you went through it. If you did the study guide, you should be okay. So here's the question on Morrison. There's a question on McCullough, main topics and ideas. So ask any question, Graham. Ask any others for you guys. I'll be happy to answer them as long as you keep asking. Why there's been a growth of mandates. Oh, cool. Separation of powers is where you're going to have three separate branches of government, and each branch of government has distinct different areas that they're supposed to work in. So you've got, say, the legislature writes the laws, and they have specific areas where it's, banking or regulations or the post office or DC. So Congress has got specific, and they've got 17 specific powers. And then you've got president, and the president's got their specific powers that they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to enforce the laws. And then you have the judicial system that has their own areas. So each group is individual and separate, and they're co-equal. Checks and balances is basically where you limit the power of one branch by another branch. So that's where the president can weaken the power of the Congress or the legislature by vetoing a bill. The judicial branch can weaken the power of the executive branch by doing a judicial review of an executive order. So they're two separate things, and item line veto is an item that basically affects one of those, and you have to know, what does that reduce? Does that reduce the separation of powers issue, or does that reduce the checks and balances? Does that reduce federalism? So there are separate, and I might look at and say, okay, them dividing the House of Representatives and the Senate into two, instead of having a unicameral, it's a bicameral. Does that affect checks and balances, or does that affect separation of powers? And the answer is that would be affecting separation of powers. It would not be checks and balances. So there's a fine line between the two, and a lot of people say they're the same, and they are definitely not the same. So separation of powers and checks and balances are two different principles, two different things, and you have to realize in England, the executive came from the legislature. So the prime minister was the person in the parliament that got the most votes, and there was no separation of power there. So really, parliament has no power. It's actually the prime minister, and the parliament gave the prime minister power. So we're separating those into two, actually three co-equal branches. Hopefully that answered your question. Anyone else with questions? Mary, I haven't heard from you. Lana, anything else, specific questions about some of these items? Yeah, it was the voting behavior of the framers. That was one of the questions that I wanted you to make sure you go over. Did they pursue the interests of the wealthy? Did they pursue the interest of the states? Did they pursue the interests of themselves? Or the national government, were they really those? There's dual federalism, marble cake federalism. Make sure you know those. New Jersey plan, Virginia plan, know the specifics on those. What the Constitution prohibits from states doing. So what do they prohibit states from doing? What's written in there? What civil liberty protection is included in the Constitution? That's in there. So that's one that I kind of ask quite a bit. What are some of the rights that are in the Constitution without having the Bill of Rights? So if it's in the Bill of Rights, that's not the original Constitution. That came later. Supremacy Clause, what is that? Why the framers, can you come up with a reason or a way that the framers may have distrusted the common people? Can you come up with something in the Constitution that gave you proof that they did not trust the common people? So see if you can figure that one out and write down your answer. John Locke. Legitimacy question, I think I asked it in one of the quizzes. Pluralist view, 2 charts. So like I said, it's about 58 questions. Chapter 1 is the least amount, and then 2 and 3 are the most. There is a slavery question. There is a question on the Federalist Papers. Question on what is federalism. So here's the question. All of the following are specifically mentioned in the Constitution except. So this is making sure you read that, know that. Constitution as originally ratified addresses all of the following weaknesses of the articles except. So that's a neat question. Federalist Paper number 51, the thesis of that was to promote separation of powers to ensure what? So make sure you know the thesis and what the main thing is of Federalist 51 and Federalist 10. Those are important. What's the rightful use of power? Which theory? Most of the major decisions are made by a small group of people comprised of business leaders, military leaders, and outside the government. The thesis of Federalist Paper 51. So that's what you need to know. Like I said, you need to know Federalist Paper 51 and 10. You've got parts in your textbook. I gave you the actual ones. You can Google those, but they're there. Read them. Know what they're about. What clause of the Constitution gives the federal government broad powers in many policy areas? So that's, there are 3 things that give the federal government broad power. And there's one part of the Constitution that reduces the power. So do you know those? So, okay. So try to get those. Any other questions? Do you know anybody else that wants to join or do anything like this? Do you know anybody that was looking for this? Okay, Riley was, all right. tell her or text her. I just sent her an invitation. If there's anybody else, let me know. I mean, this will be on YouTube and you'll be able to look at it. So it'll be on there. So this one I actually think is working, so that's good. Like I said, probably 2 questions about McCullough. So make sure you got that. And concurrent powers, reserved powers. They're both on there, so like make sure you know their powers. And like what you said, Lana, you said one was what was not a check of the power of the president on Congress. So there is that. Like I said, the elastic lost applied powers. About the reason why Congress fails to perform national leader functions. Because the Constitutional Convention basically felt that the Congress would be the first branch of government, the most important branch of government, the one that was number one and most important. And it really isn't. Probably you'd say the president or the Supreme Court. You can make arguments for either one, but it's definitely not Congress, and they're not the national leader. And there's a question on like, why is that? What are reasons for that? Like I said, devolution's on there a couple times. I've gone through most of it. I think you'll be fine with chapter 1, but it's interesting. The quiz on number 1 was actually not a great quiz question, so make sure you read it and know it. Yes, Lana, there is formal and in amendment process, and you're going to need to know it. Not only for this chapter, but for other chapters. So there are 4 ways to amend the Constitution, and you need to know all 4 ways. And part of the reason why I'm saying that is on the essay that I'm either going to ask you that one or ask you one about division of powers between the House and Senate and doing that, but you're going to do both of them. But the formal amendment process is explain it, know it, and then why are there more informal ways, and to talk about the informal methods. So on the actual test, there's probably 1 or 2, and it's mostly Congress's role in the amendment process, maybe the president's role in the amendment process, but you will need to know it. So studying it is good, at least for the essay, and knowing it. And like I said, when I was looking at it, there was like 15 on the Constitution, 15 on federalism, and then you had 5 or 6 on chapter 1, but then there was multiple questions that could be placed in different spots in different areas. Advantages of federalism. I can talk about selective incorporation. That's later on. In general, that is where the Bill of Rights are incorporated to the states, because the Bill of Rights originally were only for Congress and the national government. So Congress shall make no law restricting your right of freedom of speech or for freedom of press. What happened was, with the 14th Amendment, with due process and equal protection, the Supreme Court started applying the Bill of Rights to the states. So the first one was the freedom of speech. No state shall not make any laws restricting the freedom of speech. And that's selective incorporation, where you're incorporating the Bill of Rights to the states. And that happened starting in the 1920s. And not every amendment has been incorporated. Second Amendment has not. Not all of the amendments are there. I haven't listed it, have I? So I would say no, not on this one. This is more on, I would say, the 14th Amendment, civil rights, doing something like that. I haven't read off that, and I don't remember seeing that in there whatsoever. Okay. Mandates, grants and aid, revenue sharing, those things. That was a civil rights case that was used to basically Supreme Court validated the Civil Rights Acts, and it was one where they used the Commerce Clause to allow the Civil Rights Act to be passed. So it was a good use of the Commerce Clause, where the Supreme Court found that Congress did not overstep its bounds, and they actually said that Southerners and people that were believing in segregation had to actually have blacks allowed to go to the motels, go to the restaurants, and do that. And they were saying that they were unconstitutional because that was an invalid use of the Commerce Clause. And that's what that case was about. Anything else? Because I'll wrap it up after this. So if you don't have any other questions, let me know. Going once. Anyone else with any questions? So you can recopy this and go over this, because I did go over the topics on this and I went over what's on the test. And like I said, if you guys need anything, let me know. I'll be up for a little bit while longer. And well, she can actually watch it. She can watch it on YouTube once it's over. She can go over and, it's just she won't be able to ask any of her own questions. I sent her the invite probably a couple times. Anyone else with any questions? Graham, Alexa, Lana, Mary? Okay. All right. So see you tomorrow, and it'll be, like I said, 58 questions, multiple choice on a Scantron. You guys have a good night, and I'll stop this, and if you want to go over the broadcast again, you can, and go over those things. You guys have a good night.